Ahoy, and welcome to Titanic Talkline. I am Alexia, and I am so excited to welcome back Veronica Hinke. Hello, how are you?
Hi, good morning. It's so great to be talking with you this morning. It's bright and sunny here in Wisconsin, where I am, and I'm just really looking forward to our chat.
Me too. I really liked our first one, mostly because it just made me hungry. But
Yeah.
I posed a question to you in our chat beforehand, and I just wanted to ask you because the movie obviously is coming out again really soon. And for a limited run, and it's really exciting. I've seen people like posting about getting their tickets. I'm actually going to be back home in Maryland for the time, so I'm going to go see it with a group of friends back there, and it's kind of turning into a thing. People are gearing up for it, and I asked you, what do you think should be served at like a rewatch party?
Oh, I know what you're talking about, and I was so happy when you asked me that question because I love that question. I love thinking about that, and I love to entertain, as you know. And I'm actually getting ready to have a watch party. It's the 25th
Amazing.
anniversary of the amazing James Cameron movie that so many of us just really truly love. And so I always think in terms of things from the book that I wrote, the things that I
Hmm.
featured in my book, because I really tried to uh, cover all the different food topics I could within a certain amount of space on the
Hmm.
page. One of the things that goes so well with a movie party is popcorn. I love buttered popcorn at the movies, and I wrote in my book about a man named Dan Coxon who was a third class.
Popcorn Dan.
Yes, yeah. And so that was the first thing that I wanted to talk with you about
Hmm.
today is there's so many things you can do with popcorn to honor that immigrant experience through the story of Popcorn Dan. And for those who don't know, I'll share really briefly
Yeah.
about what who Popcorn Dan was. Dan lived where I'm talking to you from now, at my hometown, Central Wisconsin, and he lived in Merrill, Wisconsin. He worked all over Central Wisconsin, and he was an immigrant. He was from London, England, and he was a popcorn vendor. And ironically, he popped into my mind right when you asked about the movie party, because when he was going to London on the trip that he was when he was traveling on the Titanic back home to Merrill, he was going to London to try to find out how he could start one of the first Central Wisconsin movie theaters.
Oh.
And he was actually looking into, his family told the Titanic inquisitors that he was looking into how to get. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm gonna have to start over. I'm so sorry. Let me go get my puppy so I can hear.
It's okay.
Honey.
I think like half my interviews get interrupted by one of the dogs making a sound of some kind. They're reasonably well behaved, but every once in a while you just kind of get like a moment where they're like, "Nope, I have something to say."
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay. Dogs are dogs.
Oh, she's not gonna stop. Honey, come on.
Aw,
Be good girl. Be good girl.
puppy,
Hey, Mama's gotta talk to somebody. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
puppy.
Thank you. Okay. So hopefully you can edit that out.
I don't think I'm going to. I love dog interruptions.
Oh my goodness. Uh, thank you. So I love the story of Popcorn Dan. He was going to his trip to London was mainly for the purpose to see his family, of course, but also he wanted to find out what he would need to do to start the first movie theater in Merrill.
Sure.
Ironically, where he set up his popcorn stand every day in Merrill, or pretty much every day in good weather. Right now, there's a movie theater there, the Cosmo Theater.
Huh.
he wanted to find out how to get usher uniforms. That's what I think it was his brother told the Titanic investigators that. And
Hmm.
so there's so many things you can do with popcorn. You can, make caramel corn. Obviously, you can have fun with it and make popcorn balls for your guests for a Titanic movie party. You can sprinkle caramel corn or just plain or buttered popcorn on top of a sundae, an ice cream sundae.
Hmm.
Just thinking outside the box like that, outside just the regular popcorn box full of buttered
Right.
pop, and have fun with it, and really celebrate popcorn. There are things you can do with savory foods too, and so keep that in mind as well. What would you do with savory foods? So obviously popcorn. I always think of peanuts, and he sold those too. He was also a peanut vendor. Popcorn Dan did not survive. He was in third class, traveling in third class back from London, having visited his family there, and he never made it back. So I was really drawn to that story as a kid. My family told me about it, and I just was amazed. How did somebody from my hometown, which at that time was pretty landlocked, it still is physically, but people get around a lot more in this area and they travel a whole lot more than they did when I was growing up in the 70s when I heard the story for the first time. So I thought, how did he get on this incredible ship? And that's really what led me to start researching Titanic as a kid. So for sure, I definitely think popcorn is something that would be on the party menu.
I know that like now popcorn and popcorn and peanuts are more like fairground and sporting event foods, but now like popcorn is more not more but like kind of more synonymous, well, it is more with movies. But I think, movies obviously were a little bit less common than they are now in 1912. So when was popcorn served? Was it kind of like a horse race, derby, picnic food?
Well, Cracker Jack was introduced at the World's Columbian Exposition of 1892 in Chicago.
Huh.
And that was really a height for popcorn, trending in the United States when that first happened. So many things were introduced to the public at the World's Columbian Exposition of 1892 in Chicago. And that was one thing,
Mm-hmm.
actually, Cracker Jack. Now, that wasn't the first caramel corn, but it was sort of the first mainstreamed, marketed, branded type of caramel corn, obviously.
Sure.
For those that haven't had caramel corn, I would think about that for a party to get little boxes because they're so fun. I don't know if they still have, they used to have little prizes inside. And you could open up the wrapper and find maybe a little toy tattoo. I remember they used to have those when I was a kid. I don't know what they have now, but you used to be able to get a little treat inside. So that, with or without the toy inside, it would be really fun to have little popcorn boxes around. And for sure, what I love to do, I like to order different sizes of the red and white striped popcorn boxes
Mm-hmm.
and then, put them all around and let people just pick them up at their leisure, put them on a pretty mirrored tray or something and pass them around. Somebody once said to me, well, popcorn can get so messy. It can, it's true, but I think it's worth the mess. And have your film outside.
Oh yeah, if the weather permits.
Yeah.
I am not a popcorn fan. Admittedly, I am one of those people. I can't get over the kernels in my teeth thing. But I'll have a few pieces, especially if someone's eating it around me, because it's hard to avoid. You're just like, well, you're like legally obligated to have at least one piece of popcorn if somebody around you is eating it.
Yeah, exactly. You're legally.
Like I'm
Absolutely.
entitled.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Another thing you can do for a any Titanic party, but for sure with a movie party, have a beer like the Munich style lager that was on the Titanic. The Wrexham Lager Brewing Company, of course, had their beer on board. And if you can't get a hold of Wrexham, just try to find some Munich style lager. And you can't bring that into the movie theater, right? So you can do it at home in the backyard or in your living room when you have a movie parties. Have those types of beers. And one thing for every party that I have is the selection of cheeses that was on the buffet in first class for lunch every day. And we know
Huh.
that because several people have shared or several people saved menus. And one of the people that saved their menu from lunch was Ruth Dodge. And she was a first class passenger. And
Hmm.
she saved her menu that showed the different cheeses that were aboard. Camembert, there was Saint Givel cheese, which is hard to find
Hmm.
because they don't make it anymore, but
Oh.
um, you can still get like a soft, any kind of soft cheese, like a Philly cheese is kind of how it was
Hmm.
back then when it was made. Edam, Gorgonzola, Cheshire, Stilton. So a little assortment of cheeses is a great nod to the Titanic foods and wonderful for a party. If you're gonna put some kind of cheese out anyway, which you probably are, I would say,
If you're
put
classy.
right, right. Put a little thought into being strategic about it and have that assortment of cheeses from first class in lunch every day.
I think what always surprises me, especially when I talk to you, because sometimes when you read recipes or, especially when you look at the language surrounding older recipes, that they can seem very unattainable is not the word that I want, but like so very different and far away. And well, we don't do things like that anymore. But then when, I actually talk to you and you're like, no, they had beer and popcorn and cheese. It's like, that's what people have at a Super Bowl party today.
Good point. Yes. And like you say, there are so many things that are doable. It doesn't have to be an 11-course meal. You don't have to do that to honor the stories of the Titanic.
Even in the context of first class, because again, I've actually looked, through your book, and I've also looked at some of the menus and kind of not compared the two, but I've seen them, and it is interesting to me because yet I think that it's easy to get focused on the opulence of like the first class dinners because I mean we all eat spaghetti once in a while, but we don't all have an 11-course dinner 7 days in a row. Like it's just such an unusual experience that I think it's easy to get stuck on that. But then when you think about it, like they ate fruit for dessert a lot. They had a lot of cheese and they drank beer and wine, the kinds that you can still get today. And I'm now realizing that they had popcorn, which is like, why wouldn't they have had popcorn? It is just corn in heat. It didn't take some grand technological marvel to make popcorn.
Well, and I'm guessing that they probably had a little popcorn on board, but I don't know that for sure. I just referenced popcorn because
Sure.
popcorn is on board, so I want to make sure I'm explaining that clearly that there might not have been popcorn on board, but there were definitely popcorn lovers on board. So,
But you know what
uh,
there was on board was ice cream,
yes,
which was a
there,
big deal.
yes, because there were freezers on
Mm-hmm.
board that they could use, which was state of the art at the time and just really unusual on a ship.
And it's so common now. Like if you went on a cruise today and they made an announcement where they were like, "Oh, by the way, there is zero ice cream on the ship," I think people might voluntarily sink that ship because it would be like, "This is just unacceptable." But at the time, it was like, "What a concept!"
Yeah, yeah. And there was actually one man, a very young man, who was assigned the task of making the ice cream.
So cool.
Yeah, and so it was a really sure he did other things to multitask and did things to help out here and there, but his main function was to make the ice cream. So I'm so glad you brought that up because what would a movie party be without ice cream? You could make ice cream sandwiches. like you could buy at a movie concessionaire. You could, use the ice cream and the sundae to top with the caramel corn.
Mhm.
There's so many things that you can do.
When you may not know the answer to this, but like I know that novelty ice cream really obviously be must have become a thing after the portable refrigeration, not port, but like available, not refrigeration, freezer capabilities, just because you needed the ability. But were people making like ice cream creations at the time things like, I don't know when the Knickerbocker Glory Sundae was invented, for example? Like, are those things that came way later when suddenly you have the ability to keep ice cream for long enough to start stacking it? I don't know. That was just kind of a silly question.
Well, I'd like to think that people were making ice cream sandwiches, all along with doing things creatively at home with their ice cream and cookies, and just like we are
Fair.
now. I That's one thing I learned from researching and writing my book is that you know what, we're not the first foodies. There are exceptional examples throughout, the Edwardian years of people doing really neat things, of course, which is obvious with the one example of the 11-course meal. So I'm sure that those types of things were happening, and in kitchens everywhere.
Mm-hmm. It seemed like there was a lot of opportunity to show off culinarily.
Right, because people were entertaining so much at home, and entertaining was sort of like expected. You in the Edwardian years, it was just something that you did, so much so that people had calling card holders in their entryways to their homes. Of course, for sure the first class
Mm-hmm.
um, passengers would have had those.
And it was expected that if you had like a house of some appointment, like I'm sure that there was, some sort of size or money limit, but like if you were of a certain echelon, it was expected that you would host people, and not just host like, oh, you can crash on my couch, but there will be a room ready for you and there will be food and some level of entertainment. It was expected that you would entertain people sort of at the drop of a hat. And if you couldn't, it was sort of a shame.
Yeah, and I think people in all classes had their ways of entertaining at home. Entertaining was just a really special thing at that time. It was something, very common.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
people didn't go out to dinner as much as we do now, to lunch or dinner.
that was going to be my
Um,
question.
yeah, people don't stay home and cook like they used to. I think there's more of it now in the last few years of people cooking at home and entertaining at home with really close friends, but definitely still not as much as it used to be, just because of the accessibility. We have
Mm-hmm.
so many friends now.
Yeah, I realized it's my preferred way to hang out with people is to not go out places. Um, Part of it is because I've realized there's like, I'll go to a restaurant and about 50% of the time I don't like my food. And it's like, well, that is disappointing. If I cook for myself at home and it's bad, then I blame me. And it cost me the cost of groceries. If you go out, it's like, well, I paid this and that and this and that's a little bit more like disappointing. But as you mentioned, the accessibility is a thing. Like I if I open DoorDash on my phone right now, I think I can get more restaurants that will deliver food to me that I can scroll in the course of 1 minute.
Yeah, exactly.
It's weird to consider that, number one, there was this whole era where it was like just expected that a stranger could show up at a rich person's house of the same echelon and be like, hi, I live here for the next 3 days. And if you don't treat me like a superstar, I will tell everyone. And it was a thing. And it was like, you couldn't even pawn them off and be like, oh, we'll take them out to dinner and put them up at a nice hotel so I don't have some loon in my house. It was like, no, I'm expected to bring you into my home and treat you like an invited guest.
Yeah,
That is wild to me as a concept.
it is wild as a concept. Well, do you want me to read a little passage from my book
Yes.
about what someone said about the food aboard the Titanic?
Yes, I do.
I would love to do that. One of my favorite stories is about Adelpha Zellfeld. He
Hmm.
was a first class passenger and he was carrying perfume samples with him. He was going to try to
That's why the
sell.
name's familiar. The
Yes, yeah, that
perfume.
I was talking about earlier. And his vials of perfumes were found, of course, many years later. And he did survive, but he really suffered a lot of judgment over, well, why did you survive and so many men didn't? And quite frankly, what happened with Adelphel was, early on in boarding the lifeboats, there was a spot and he was allowed in and he, was able to survive that way. Nobody said, women and children first to him, or he would have definitely had, not have taken that seat. But he did take the seat that he did, and he survived. He had a really hard time afterwards because of the scrutinization. And so his story is very near and dear to my heart because, he was kind of in that predicament. And I love how he loved food. So he was 47 when he was on the Titanic. And on the first day of the trip, like so many other excited passengers, he penned a letter home. He penned his letter to his wife, Gertrude, back in England. And he told her that he had just spent hours roaming through this wonderful boat. He liked his accommodations. He said, it is like a bed, sitting room, and rather large. So kind of like a suite, like
Hmm.
an ensuite almost. Um, and he said they are still busy finishing the last touches on board. And I loved reading that because I thought, wow, that really paints the visualization of all of the detail that went into getting ready and all of the scurrying about trying to make sure everything was perfect because they were still finishing things when he boarded. Uh, he said that he believed that his letter would be the first to be written home from the Titanic. And in 2009, his letter sold at an auction for $3,500 um, in New York City. So these letters that have been found or that, family members have shared, to make sure that they are restored for history, um, they've really been very valuable financially. Salfeld told Gertrude that there were only 370 first class passengers. He also wrote about the hot and cold running water in his cabin, and he let his wife know that he had eaten a big lunch. Here we go. Okay. He had soup, filet of pless, which is like a flounder fish.
Okay.
He had a loin chop with cauliflower and fried potatoes.
Those are two
And
entrees.
yes, right. The I'm assuming probably a um nice cauliflower floret with the chop. He ate an apple Manhattan for dessert
Ooh.
and then some Roquefort cheese. And that was probably from that buffet of cheeses, the assortment of cheeses that I mentioned earlier. I'm sure that was. And he said he washed it down with a Spaten beer iced. So there was ice in his beer. And the beer was likely the iced draft Munich lager style from Wrexham Brewery.
Hmm.
Um, that Wrexham Brewery is in England.
Right.
He said that his letter to her, he had had a long promenade and dozed for an hour until 5 p.m. So that's interesting that he, slept a little bit of the afternoon away there. And he said that the band played in the afternoon for tea, but instead he had had coffee. He called it cafe with
Oh.
an accent aigu on the E there. He wrote cafe, which is coffee,
You
with
ever, so
bread.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you ever have that one person that comes back from a trip abroad and insist on like, did they say a couple words with an accent just to make you nuts? I worked at a Le Pain Quotidien, and there was a server there who would say tartine instead of tartine, but just that one. It would be like, we need a ham and cheese tartine. It was like, you need to calm down.
Oh, that's cute.
It was it was cute the first three times it happened, and after that, it was like, all right, I get it.
Oh,
You've got the accent. Leave me alone. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
there's a limit on that. There's a limit on that
Is it
quota.
the
Yeah,
cafe in the afternoon?
cafe.
Cafe.
Well, and in his case, I think they might have referred to it as cafe like that in England at the time where he lived.
Oh,
He said he had it with bread and butter in the Veranda Cafe.
that's not what I would expect to pair with coffee.
Well, yeah, that's why I love these letters. He had thought that he would have to pay for everything, but to his surprise, the food was, he called it gratis, free.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was free, and he remarked about that, which really says a lot about how these people, received this experience, or how surprised they were by things.
Right.
He said he didn't know if he'd be up on time to mail the letter at Queenstown, which is now Cobh, um, the town in Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
when the Titanic made a stop there, so he would mail it that night. So, and interestingly enough, that menu from that lunch that he described was auctioned off in 2012, and it set a new record. It was sold to a private collector for £64,000.
Wow.
Yes, and it had been saved by the May brothers, Richard and Stanley. Now they were fishmongers, two brothers. They were traveling to Cork for a fishing vacation,
Uh-huh.
and they boarded the Titanic in Southampton, just like Adelpha did. But they didn't continue on across the ocean, and they sailed across the Irish Sea to Queenstown instead of the apple Manhattan that Selfeld had. He could have had what was on the menu: rice pudding or pastries, um, a consomme chardonnay, which is like a vegetable based consomme. And,
Huh.
by consomme, it's heavy on the broth, lighter on the actual ingredients. Beef steak and kidney pie. That would be fun to make for a Titanic book party or
It's a
a,
good heavy, that's a good hearty, not heavy, but like hearty main.
yeah. And, you could make little pies, miniature pies,
Oh
and pass those to
yeah.
your movie guests. Um, there were fried potatoes, mashed or baked in their jackets. There was lobster, herring, sardines, or shrimp. A round of spiced beef, roast beef, and hams, corned ox tongue, brawn, and bologna sausage. And then there was a gallatin of chicken, which is like a rolled stuffed chicken served cold usually, and I don't know how they served it in the Titanic, but I would guess it was served cold. So that's neat to think of. I love cold chicken myself.
I was about to say that sounds awful, but I think that might be a me thing.
Well, yeah, the things were very different back then.
Yeah.
Um, so Adolpha had a table all to himself for lunch, and
You would
I'll
need one with all of that food.
right, and he was able to get his own table by mentioning the name of a friend of his. It was a manager with the White Star Line in London, so he had some really great connections. And then he wrote also about a very good dinner that he had later on with two cigars in the smoke room. So he signed off saying, oh, this is not the same letter, but on the last night before the Titanic struck the iceberg, Saalfeld had sent a telegram home to Gertrude and saying, enjoying best Adolpha. And that was the last that thing that he sent from the Titanic. So, yeah, a lot of little clues there that Adelpha shares with us through his letters to Gertrude, or his letter to Gertrude, and the menu from the fishing brothers about what the food looked like, and I just love uncovering those details like that. So if you ever hear of a letter like that that hasn't made it into the news yet, let me know, because I love to collect these little nuggets, or even if it's out in the news, I would love to hear about it.
Well,
Um,
letters are fun. They're snippets to people's lives. Like I think I saw some things online somewhere where someone had said something along the lines of a historian's favorite person is an ancient nosy neighbor. They're the kind of people that'll record like the mundanities of day-to-day life.
Definitely.
I'm trying to think of the example that they use. Yeah, like there I think someone had said there's a city, I'm thinking it's either Greece or Italy, where they found, in addition to salt and pepper shakers on almost every table, there was a third shaker, but nobody knows what it contained, and it doesn't seem to be written down anywhere because it was whatever it was so obvious to everyone who lived there that there was no point in making a record.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it is those kind of little things where I you then maybe you uncover someone's journal from that time period and someone's been writing their journal and they're like Allison made the miss like that shake the mustard shaker empty again or whatever the case may be, and then suddenly it's like, oh, someone's mystery was solved because someone wrote a gripe journal. But it's that kind of thing where the people who you need the everyday looks into people's lives to piece together how history is. I saw something else on Facebook today that said a woman started taping everything that was on TV in 1979 and continued until her death in 1912. And now those archives are being digitized because it is the most complete collection of TV from that time period.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's just because one person was like, I'm gonna do this thing.
Very cool. That is awesome. Do we have time for me to read one of my favorite letters?
Yeah.
Because I love this letter from Popcorn Dan, home to the man who was helping him take care of his place while he was gone. Mr. Ballstead, he worked at the bank. And this is a really cute, funny letter. So I want to share this with you. Dan wrote this on April 1st. He was still in London. He hadn't gotten on the Titanic yet, obviously. And he was writing to let Mr. Ballstead know that he was coming back home
Mm-hmm.
and aboard the Titanic. So he says, Dear Mr. Ballstead, I am now wishing to let you know that I am coming back. I have already booked my passage by the Titanic, which will leave Southampton on the Wednesday after Easter, April 10th. So you can calculate about what time it will reach New York. And this is so cute. This is really funny. He says, I was very delighted to receive your letter. It was quite a wonder, though, that I did get it, as the envelope was only addressed Mr. Daniel Coxon, London, England, which of course is not sufficient for a place like London. Anyway, I was glad to get it. Thanks to the post office people here. Can you imagine in London?
He just knew who
Uh,
he was.
yeah, yeah. He was very well known. So maybe they knew him very well in London too. I can, of course, quite understand not receiving your first letter now, though. Uh, I have had a pretty good time on the whole, but I'm getting rather tired of holiday making and shall be very glad to get back again and settle down once more. No doubt by the time I get back to Merrill, the weather will have become settled and I shall be able to set about getting ready for work, getting his horse going and getting his crater wagon out um, and popcorn and so forth. The weather here is beginning to get quite nice, and spring over here is very enjoyable and delightful. And this part made me kind of sad. He said, Today was the Oxford and Cambridge boat race. I did not see it as there was no one at hand who could conveniently take me. I have seen a good deal since I have been here and am therefore very well satisfied. I hope everybody is well in Merrill. That is, of course, I mean my friends. I hope all are getting along all right. I shall have heaps of news to tell when we meet, so we'll say no more now. I am
Hmm.
much obliged for what you have kindly done, and thank you for anything you may do for me when I return. You will observe that I will be spending the Easter holidays here, so shall see something of the way people spend their bank holiday at Appy Amstead. Ha! Goodbye for the present. Kind remembrances to everybody there. Kind regards to yourself. Yours sincerely, Dan Coxon.
We need to start writing letters again.
Very well put. Yes. And The other thing I take away from that letter is, here he wanted to go to the Cambridge race and no one could take him. And he had a large family.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? We just have to really like live in the moment
Yeah.
and be there for our people, because you never know when it's your last opportunity to be with someone.
It's something that we've been talking about in my family. So my immediate family, there's the four of us, and we're all adults now. And something we've been talking about more in that, as we're all getting older, you realize that, as you just said, you have to experience things now. And I was watching a TV show that I really like. It's a Korean show. It's on Netflix. It's called Extraordinary Attorney Woo. It's about a young attorney out of college with autism getting her first job. And there's one part there where a young man is explaining that children need to play now because it's too late tomorrow. It's too late after you get a job. It's too late after you get married to play. And there's a bunch more surrounding this case that's far more complicated, but as a basic philosophy, the concept I agree with, because I don't have children, and I have friends who have children of a variety of ages. I have friends who have infants and friends who have 10, 11 teenagers. And it is interesting just to see, even at such a young age, like how much pressure they are under. And it kind of makes me kind of go back to that thought where it's like, you need to have chances to enjoy your moments now, because before you know it, it will be too late, because you'll be a college graduate or married, or you'll have children and suddenly realize that everything has gone by you in an absolute like whoosh.
Yeah. And, making the most of each day, being there for people. It's so easy to beg off and say, oh, I'm busy or I have other plans. But, um, you know, I try to think every day of that letter that Dan wrote home to Mr. Balstead, and how am I interacting with people so that, I'm helping them live their best life too. And, what can I do to make a difference in someone else's life, and just being there for people.
Mm-hmm. It's a good way to think about things, and I'll fully admit that I do try to be nice. I do try to be a good person, but I am human and I fail, and sometimes I'm mean, and things of that nature. And as it is human to do so, but that's why it's important just learn from your mistakes, move on, apologize, and make sure that you have those good memories with people. Because the thing that stuck out to me about that letter you read was that he said, like, I have a lot more to tell you, but I want to tell you in person. And I've done that before, and then lucky for me, I've been able to meet up with that person and tell them my news. But I've done that before where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to tell you all these stories, but I don't want to do it over the phone because I want to tell you when I see you next week at your birthday. And it's very much that. And again, like I said, lucky for me, I've it's never happened where suddenly that person was gone like that. But in this case, you're waiting to hear from your friend, and then the next time you do, it's like, oh, I'm not going to hear from them.
Yeah. Yeah. And good point. Well, and another letter from Popcorn Dan. Is it okay if I read another one, or
Yeah.
have I read letters? Okay. So I love this because on April 15th, which was the day when, the day after the night when the Titanic struck the iceberg,
Mm-hmm.
the following day, a letter arrived in Brooklyn, New York. And it came to the editor of the dramatics section of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. And his name was H.V. Kaltenborn. And when I read that, I thought, I know that name from journalism history. I went to school for journalism and studied history, and I knew that name. Well, H.V. Kaltenborn was also from Merrill. He was sort of a kind of a rock star reporter of the day in the 1930s.
Hmm.
And he covered the Dewey Truman campaign. He covered the Spanish American War, and really was very well known. And it turned out from my research about Popcorn Dan that they were friends. They both had lived in Merrill, and he was going to be meeting Kaltenborn when he got into New York City. And I love to think about that. What were these people going to do when they got to New York? I love to think about all the different stories of, um, what they were going to do. Well, when H.V. Kaltenborn got this letter on the 15th, he went running into his editor to say, look, I have a letter from someone who was aboard the Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Dan must have mailed the letter from Cove, or no, it was Queenstown then, or maybe from Cherbourg. He boarded in Southampton, and so the letter had been mailed while he was en route. And he wrote, or actually, I remember now, he wrote it from while he was still in England and sent it to HV, letting him know he was going to come to New York. So he says in the letter, my holiday here is now drawing to a close, and I've already booked my passage back for home. I am returning on the Titanic, which will leave from Southampton on the Wednesday after Easter, that is on the 10th of April. So you will be able to calculate the time of my arrival at New York, when I hope to have the pleasure of seeing you again. If you happen to have the time, I should of course be only too pleased if you could manage to come and meet me on the arrival of the boat. I have had a very good time, but now feel that I shall be glad to return to work, for I'm getting a little tired of fooling around. I think that by the time I get back, the weather should be settling for the better, and the rougher kind will, I hope, be all over. It is growing pleasant here now, and spring here, as you may know, is very delightful. Wishing you all good things until we meet. And that letter appeared in the Daily Eagle that day, on the 15th. So either the 15th or 16th, as soon as they could get it printed, because it was most unusual. And I was impressed by the formality and the fact that, I got the sense that Dan was a little nervous about getting into New York City. He had asked HV to come meet him at the dock and help him figure out where to go. So,
Yeah.
I love these letters. Thank you for letting me read them.
I I know that not everyone has had a chance to read your book, and that maybe not everyone will get that chance. And that's why I'm grateful for you sharing those letters. Simply because not everyone may have a chance to read them independently, and I think that they're important, and I find them very interesting and charming and sad.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I love your podcast, because like you said, you know, people want to read every book out there on Titanic, but they don't have time. So this is like a nice way of sort of, giving people the highlights, cliff notes, tailoring information together. Um, if you want, I can read the caramel corn recipe from the book. Would you like me to read that?
Yes, please. If anyone would like to make their own caramel corn, listen up. The expert's going to tell us.
And this recipe is from Kim Delos Kusheri, a Chicago chef who contributed this for the book. And it's for caramel corn, but like we were talking earlier about how there's nothing documented that caramel corn was on board, but it's probably not unlikely. It's probably very, it wouldn't be surprising if people had had that as a snack.
It was a treat of the time.
Yes, a very, very popular treat at the time. And Kim has this wonderful recipe. She sprinkles it on top of an ice cream sundae. And here's her recipe for caramel corn: 2 1/3 cups popped popcorn, kernels removed, 1 1/3 cup light brown sugar, a half a cup of corn syrup, 2/3 cups of butter, a half a teaspoon cream of tartar, 1 teaspoon salt, and 1 teaspoon baking soda. And bring these ingredients, the first few ingredients, bring to together. It's the brown sugar, the syrup, butter, cream of tartar, not the cream of tartar, and salt, and bring that together to 300 degrees in a large pot on the stovetop. And then immediately whisk in the baking soda and fold in popcorn very lightly, of course, because you don't want to beat up that popcorn by stirring it too much and break it up too much whole, obviously. So just maybe a couple quick folds. Make sure the popcorn is completely coated and then spread it into a parchment lined sheet tray, a cookie sheet, baking sheet. And as it cools, she recommends separating the kernels to make little bite-sized pieces. And there you go.
I know that with certain baking doughs, if you overwork them, they get too tough. Obviously, you were saying that if you overwork it, you could break up the popcorn. But does it stiffen and harden the caramel if you keep working at it? I've never worked with caramel.
I don't think it affects it that much. I've
Oh,
never
good.
experienced that. I have worked with it a lot.
Okay.
And I don't think it really matters, but
I think
I
this
don't.
is me confusing caramel with glass.
Okay, yes, and I know what you're getting at. Um, well, you mentioned ice cream earlier. Would you like an ice cream recipe?
Yes, let's please distract everyone from the fact that I was confusing glass blowing with making caramel. Oh my
Would
god.
you have Grand Marnier ice cream or French or vanilla? You pick your ice cream flavor.
I think the listeners are going to want to hear about the Grand Marnier.
That's where I went right away too. So I think that's a great pick. Thank you for thinking that. This is from Craig Flynn, who is and he's an executive chef in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I'm sure you know why a chef from Halifax, Nova Scotia was featured in the book. I made sure to feature someone from Halifax because
Nova.
that is. Were you gonna? I'll let you tell.
No,
Do you
I
want
was
to?
I was just I don't even know what I was going to say. I was just nodding in agreement.
Okay, because it was really important to me to include Halifax in the book, modern day Halifax, because that is where the ship came from that went out looking for people, passengers that did not survive, from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
It's
So,
where the Mackie Bennett departed and returned.
yes, exactly. So, this is from Halifax Grand Marnier ice cream.
Mm.
2 cups whipping cream, 2 cups milk, whole or 2%. I'd go for the whole. I have to admit, you
I mean, for
know,
making ice cream, whole milk is usually the standard because of its thickness.
right? I know, yeah. And then the zest of 1 orange, 1 cup white sugar, 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, an eighth of a teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons Grand Marnier liqueur, and bring the cream, milk, and orange zest to a simmer. Set the liquid aside for 1 hour to steep. Add the egg yolks to the bowl of a stand mixer along with half of the sugar. Beat on high using a whisk attachment until the mixture is light in color and the sugar has dissolved. Place the liquid back on the heat and add the salt, vanilla, and the remaining sugar. When hot, add the liquid to the egg yolk mixture in a slow and steady stream, whisking continuously. When all the hot liquid is added to the yolks, transfer the custard to a bowl and set it over a pot of simmering water. Cook gently, stirring constantly with a rubber spatula until the custard thickens and coats the back of a spatula. Strain the custard through a fine meshed sieve and cool completely. Chill in the fridge and process in an ice cream machine following the manufacturer's instructions. And that was from Craig Flynn,
I was just
Halifax.
thinking that that would be really good with caramel popcorn as a topping.
Wouldn't that be delicious?
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Really good.
Oof. Add a little butterscotch drizzle. I'm having ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've got our party venue
I
planned.
think so. And again, I just want to I'm still blown away by again how similar the foods are. Like there's just such a thought that like retro food or vintage food is hard to make, hard to source, difficult, super classy, or has a million steps. But you think about how, when you really think about it, it's like it's ice cream and popcorn and a nice roast and fried potatoes and beer.
I, yeah. I love that you a nice roast. And it's like such a great centerpiece for any party.
Yeah, and it works for your budget. And that was the other thing, like, with the unattainability, it's like, yes, not everyone can afford filet mignon. You don't need that. Just get a nice cut of meat that you can prepare well, and you're completely fine.
And I would say try to find one and pick your favorite movie theater candy.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever your thing is, if it's red licorice or, whatever your dots or who knows what, and find a recipe online to make that. I think people would really enjoy honoring their favorite candy from the movie theater and sharing that with their friends at the party.
Yeah, I know that that's a really popular thing to do, is kind of do like potluck style, and I think that could be really fun, where it's like someone bring a popcorn, you pick it, someone brings an ice cream thing, one maybe the host, because it's easier if you have the kitchen to do like the main. But there's so many ways of doing these parties and stuff that are within, you don't have to go crazy. There doesn't have to be champagne and caviar. As a matter of fact, if you invite me to a Titanic party and that's all you serve, I'm leaving.
Yes, although it would be really fun to do a little caviar, right? With some blinis and toast points and all the different condiments that go with it.
Yeah. So you're feeling, yeah, if you really want to do like that homage, that you can set it up as like definitely as an addition, but it's like if that's all you're serving, it's like I'm good.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
There needs to be
Definitely.
food at a party.
Yes. I love the for sure the nice roast, and what a great idea. Wow. I'm loving the idea of, people bringing their favorite things to share like you suggested, and have a baked potato party. You the baked potatoes and have everybody bring a topping, because they talked that about jacket potatoes. They talked about that in the letter, and
Mm-hmm.
jacket potatoes were surely on the menus. Um, Turn it into a baked potato party.
Baked potatoes and popcorn. I did and beer. Amazing. Amazing. That's perfect.
Very good.
I think that sounds amazing to me. But just, Veronica, as always, thank you so much for coming on. I always love talking to you. I learned so much. I really liked those letters, and I thank you for sharing them, because, like, as we said, not everyone's going to have a chance to read your book, and I really appreciate you sharing a lot of the contents with us.
Well, I want to thank you, and thank you very sincerely for all that you're doing to share these stories. Your podcast is one of my favorites, and
Oh,
you're doing amazing work. So I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing.
well, thank you so much. And as always, so good to talk to you.
You too. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Veronica again so much for coming back on the show. Always an amazing time. And if you haven't had a chance to read her book, I really recommend it. It is called Last Night on the Titanic, Unsinkable Drinking, Dining, in Style. And I also highly encourage you to connect with her on social media. She is Food Steringer on Twitter, FoodStringer, and Foodstringer underscore, nope, just regular Foodstringer on Instagram. And I highly recommend following her on Instagram, because she posts really, really cool and pretty pictures of a bunch of food that you should definitely salivate over like I do, because it all looks amazing. Yeah, be sure to follow the show on all the social medias, the same username on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, Titanic Talkline, all one word. Check out the link in the description box and pick up a t-shirt. My new adorable shirt featuring me and my two real-life dogs, Leto and Princess, is for sale, and I think it is the perfect thing that you need for the upcoming warmer weather. I know you can't picture it being warm now for some of you, but it will be. And I'll see you guys in the next time. Bye!